One morning in October of 1826, sailors were loading 3 barrels labeled bitter salts aboard a boat at George's Dock in Liverpool, England. There was such a foul stench coming from the barrels that the captain had them removed to the Old City Deadhouse to be investigated. There, dock officials made the horrific discovery of 11 bodies of men, women, and children that were salted and pickled inside the barrels. The barrels were supposed to be transported to the port of Leyes, Scotland, near Edinburgh. It is believed the bodies were headed to desperate anatomists and Scottish medical schools who were paying between £10 to £15 for bodies to be brought in from England. There were only 55 legal medical cadavers to be distributed each year in Scotland, but demand was so high at the time, it is believed that anatomists were dissecting over 500 illegal bodies a year. The shipper who had transported the containers to the dock revealed that he had taken them from a large house with cellars situated opposite of what is now the Everyman Theatre. The home was owned by Reverend James McGowan, who ran a school in the home, but rented the cellar to a mysterious Scotsman who stored and sold fish oil. Detectives knocked down the locked cellar door and found barrels and sacks of 22 bodies of men, women, and children. One barrel only contained the bodies of babies soaked in brine. The police determined that most of the bodies had come from a nearby cemetery, but a few may have come from Cambridge Street workhouse that sold the bodies of tenants instead of giving them a proper burial. The mysterious Scotsman was never found, but James Donaldson, a body snatcher who may have been connected to the case, was convicted and sentenced to a year in Kirkdale Prison. Today, the home used by the Scotsman is now considered one of the most haunted places in Liverpool. Mysterious sounds are often heard coming from the old cellar. Cold spots are felt all over the home. Unknown voices and whispers are often heard at night, and some people have even claimed to have felt invisible hands grabbing them, as if someone or something was reaching out for help. The Edinburgh Vaults in Edinburgh, Scotland are a series of chambers that were built into the 19 arches of the South Bridge in 1788. The chambers were used by taverns, cobblers, and other merchants for storage. However, they quickly deteriorated due to dampness caused by poor waterproofing of the arches. This, combined with the poor air quality in the vaults, led to them being abandoned and left to the poorest citizens to take shelter in. Crime ran rampant, with prostitution, robbery, and murder, all becoming a normality within the underground life of the vaults. Each of the vaults had their own separate entrance and hauntings. The Nadry Street vaults are haunted by a poltergeist that controls one of the rooms. New light bulbs burst as soon as they're replaced. Women have been attacked when they enter the room. People often faint if they stay too long. The sounds of whispering, children crying, heavy footsteps, shuffling noises, and whimpering can be heard coming from inside the vaults. Others have reported being pushed and scratched by invisible forces while inside. The Blair Street vaults are another section that are well known for being haunted by multiple ghosts. Groaning noises and children crying are frequently heard from within its chambers. These vaults are home to a very gentle spirit, and also a very sinister one. An apparition of a kind-looking old man appears in one of the rooms, and is usually seen making shoes, earning him the name, the Cobbler. The sinister spirit has been dubbed Mr. Boots, as he gets angry when people enter his room with lights. Mr. Boots can be very violent towards women, and is known to push and choke them if they enter his room. His presence can be felt in every room of the Blair Street vaults, except for the Cobbler's room. Bruce's Castle and Cave on Rathlin Island in Northern Ireland is full of countless ghost stories and legends from local fishermen, hikers, and tourists. The island was a known sanctuary and hiding place for centuries until Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norrie overtook the island and castle. Those living on the island quickly surrendered, but Norrie's forces slaughtered the helpless 400 civilians and 200 castle defenders, including the sick, old, and dying. Today the castle is in ruins. People have reported hearing screams and cries coming from the old site. A ghostly figure of a man in old leather armor is often seen guarding the castle perimeter before vanishing. One spirit attempts to interact with people. She is known as the Brown Lady and walks the castle grounds and approaches visitors as if trying to speak, but she never says anything before fading away. The cave on Rathlin Island is believed to be the most haunted place in Northern Ireland. It is thought to have been bewitched long ago by the pagans who first inhabited the island. People report hearing moans and whispers coming from deep within the cave. Legend has it that the Scottish king Robert the Bruce and his men hid in the cave from the English after their brutal defeat, waiting for their forces to regroup during the First War of Scottish Independence. Robert the Bruce eventually defeated the English and was recognized as the true king of Scotland. According to local folklore, the king never died, that he and his men have returned to the old cave and entered into an enchanted sleep, waiting until the day they will awake and unite their fellow Scotsmen to defend against those who would attack Scotland. Recently, a group of fishermen settled into the cave to take a break and make tea. As they gathered and poured their cups, a hand appeared out of the darkness and placed an extra cup out to be filled. The fishermen quickly poured their mysterious guest a cup, too afraid to look up and see what was lurking in the darkness. The hand then disappeared back into the depths of the cave with its cup. In Dublin, Ireland, Cavannagh's Pub holds the proud title of being the oldest family-run pub in the city. The pub opened in 1833, and it soon became known as the Gravediggers Pub because it was located right next to Glasnevin Cemetery. It became a custom for gravediggers in the cemetery to shovel dirt against the pub's wall to signal they wanted a pint. Many body snatchers took sanctuary in the pub and were known to enjoy a pint or two after a night of hard work. Today, the pub is said to be haunted by an old man dressed in tweeds who enjoys sitting at the bar drinking a pint before quickly disappearing. Glasnevin Cemetery opened a year before Cavannagh's Pub, but it quickly became a hotspot for body snatchers to visit. The Dublin Anatomy School and Royal College of Surgeons required a vast number of bodies for dissection in Dublin. Adult bodies were worth £2, while bodies of children were sold by inch. 12-foot walls were built around the cemetery to protect from grave robbers and body snatchers. Watchtowers were quickly built along the perimeter, but it eventually became necessary for mobile watchtowers to be built and moved around to guard fresh graves. The cemetery tried placing heavy slabs over important graves, installed cages around others, and employed a team of watchmen to protect the remains of people's loved ones. Today, Glasnevin Cemetery is the final resting place of 1.5 million people across 124 acres. You don't have to worry about body snatchers, but the cemetery is believed to be haunted by several ghosts and ghouls, so you never know who or what you may encounter in the Glasnevin Cemetery. Our final story is by far the most heartbreaking. 5 Cottage Street is now the eternal home of a young girl who frantically wanders the upstairs searching for a way to escape. The Black Death ravaged York's population during the late 1300s. The family in the house had slowly watched all of their loved ones perish from one of the deadliest plagues on Earth. One night, before one more tragedy occurred, this young girl was being tucked into bed when her parents noticed a red ring around the back of her neck. Distraught at the potential first sign of the horrible plague, they tucked her into bed, packed their things, and left York to never return. The last thing they did was the most horrendous of all. They locked all the doors to the home and painted a red cross on the door, the mark of the plague, so the residents in the city knew to quarantine the home and not to enter. The girl awoke and quickly found that she was locked upstairs and all alone. She desperately screamed and banged on the windows day after day for help. The house was just around the corner from the York Minster. Despite people going to church each Sunday and the market outside the home, no one dared to enter before they lifted the quarantine. They finally entered 3 weeks after the screams had stopped. They found that the corpse of the girl was not bloated from infection or disease, but her body was just skin and bones where she had slowly starved to death. The mark on her neck had been the early onset of measles and not the plague. So many people heard her screams each day and night, but did nothing to help her. Remember this story when you see someone in need. You never know what difference your actions can make when everyone around you is too worried about themselves to help those who need it most. Hey guys, Uncle Unit here. Today's video has been a collaboration with The Strangest. If you want to hear 5 more chilling stories from Europe, head over to their channel and make sure you tell them that Uncle Unit sent ya. And of course, as always, never forget. There's always a reason to be afraid.
This story takes place in 2017. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything that we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling for her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much about what she said next. "I'm gonna go use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with the feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall. I opened my eyes and stared at the wall less than a foot away from my face, as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was, and how I hoped that Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes passed like this when suddenly the bed dipped on the side that I wasn't occupying, as if someone were sitting down. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get onto my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point, I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person, just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it were breathing, too. In and out, pressed against me. In and out. The atmosphere is still suffocating in the room, filled with what I can only describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger. Don't move. I will hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact that I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yeah?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area where I had felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it had appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she had felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape from the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him, and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad is a veteran, so he is not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred before, though. Just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me, or my dad, since. I work night shift at a 1920s mental hospital. Obviously, countless people have died here for various reasons. Hangings, murder-suicide beatings, accidental overdose, electroshock therapy, etc. There are 4 floors, with the 4th floor being the well-known hotspot for paranormal activity. Me being security, I have to check it out every once in a while. The 4th floor is essentially an extremely long hallway, approximately 1,800 steps. With housing units, each unit has a 5-inch thick steel door, and there's a window at the very end of the hall. They don't house patients due to the fact that the county took over a while before I started, and it's completely empty by the time 3rd shift rolls around. The 4th floor is also the only floor in the entire complex that is completely off the ground due to the complex being built into a hill. It is also where the electroshock therapy took place a long time ago. This occurrence happened last Wednesday on 3rd shift. I wanted to do a walk through the 4th floor that night around 3 a.m. for no reason other than I was feeling brave. I walk all the way down to the window. Eventually, as I got closer, I started seeing that the window obviously needs cleaning. When I got about 5 feet away, all of a sudden there was a handprint that would have been extremely noticeable from even 15 feet away. I looked at the handprint, turned around, said nope, and walked back down the hall. On my way back from the window, I peek into a side office area with my flashlight just to look. Nothing. Kept going. After a couple seconds, it sounded like someone was running up behind me, so I walked even faster because everything in my body said not to turn around. As I kept walking, I passed by a unit, and as I passed, I heard what sounded like someone punching the door. Put it up to paranoia due to the running I heard prior, that is until I passed another unit. Another loud thud, as if again someone had punched the door. So at this point I start speed walking down the hall, and while I am, I hear footsteps following mine. Mind you, these units are not connected at all, and again, the entire floor is completely empty. That's just one of my experiences. I have also been having dreams of a white, skinny woman in a hospital gown that has black hair with bangs in her face. I always thought she was just a reoccurring person in my dreams, until I talked with one of the CNAs that worked tonight in the kids unit. I never brought her up to the CNA. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I had just explained. We were just talking about ghosts, and she said that numerous people have said that they've seen the exact woman that I just explained. I then explained to the CNA in detail about how she looked in my dreams, and she just went pale and her mouth hung open. Supposedly, this ghost is extremely well known throughout the hospital by various people. People have seen her in mirrors, have been locked in bathrooms, and have seen her just walking around. But in my dreams, she always just appears or runs up to me, grabs me, and screams in my face. There was this one dream in particular where I woke up from a dream to wake up in my duplex's stairway. I walk down the stairs, because that's where my bedroom is, and walk into my bedroom. Once in there, I see my bed, my fiancé sleeping on her side of the bed, and myself also sleeping. In front of my closet, which is on my side of the bed, I see that same woman standing next to my body, just staring at me. I walk up to her, and I get the courage to ask her just who the hell she is. She looks at me, grabs me, screams in my face, then shoves me onto my bed, which is when I officially woke up at 3:15 a.m. I have no clue who this woman is at all, but I still dream about her every now and then. Every single dream is in a different place, but she's just there, and this has been going on since I started working at my job. About 11 years ago, a group of friends and myself drove to Mineral Wells, Texas for a spontaneous midnight exploration of the long-abandoned and supposedly haunted Baker's Hotel. It was incredibly creepy inside. The place was pitch black and littered with old pieces of dusty, moldy furniture and decor from the 50s and 60s, whenever it was last operating. The first thing that freaked us out was that it sounded like the building was breathing. And loudly. Turned out it was just flooding in the basement that was echoing through the elevator shafts. Anyways, we started exploring everywhere. By the time we got to the 7th floor, we were a little disappointed that nothing weird had happened yet. The adrenaline was kinda wearing off. We started walking down this long hallway on the 7th floor, peeking into various rooms and peering around with our flashlights. All of a sudden we heard a door, coming from the end of the hallway we were moving toward, slowly open, and then slowly close. It was creaking very loudly, just like in a scary movie. It scared us, and we froze. We were close enough that our flashlights reached the door in question. It was some kind of small, weird door, framed inside of a larger, regular door. My friend wanted to turn around and leave. We thought maybe there was a homeless person in there, and they were trying to scare us off. Nonetheless, I convinced him to keep going because I had to go in the room now. We started walking slowly toward the door, all the while saying stuff out loud like, "We're just exploring, if someone's in there, we're just messing around," things like that. We were probably about 15-ish feet away when the door suddenly began opening again, eerily and slowly like before. However, this time it slammed shut, right in front of our eyes. Again, we were scared frozen. Again, I insisted that we keep going. A minute or so later, we worked up the courage and just barged right in that door as fast as we could. What was in there? Absolutely nothing. There was no possible explanation for whatever had opened and closed and then slammed that door. There were no cracked windows allowing for the airflow from outside. There was nothing. We shut the door behind us and sat down in nervous disbelief, and then chain smoked a couple of cigarettes each. We finally left and actually went through the rest of the building. Myself and a few friends go on a road trip every summer to visit haunted places. In 2018, we stayed at a haunted hotel in the northeastern United States and had to sign a safety waiver just to stay there. It was a small country hotel, and the only other party had canceled, so we had the place to ourselves with our tour guide. We had a spirit box type of device, which I've been skeptical of, but we all carried on conversations. There was a moment where I heard my name through the box, when I had never said my name, and even said my full name. I prefer a shortened version. We spent a lot of time upstairs in a room where the quote-unquote ladies of the night would sleep, and I was prohibited from sitting on the bed by a spirit that was allegedly the ladies' bodyguard. I sat down only for a few seconds, and as soon as I stood, the bed lifted up and dropped, scaring the hell out of me, and at least one of my friends witnessed this. We went upstairs to an unfinished floor that was under renovation. There was an old ornate chair that was used by a notorious Irish mafia hitman that stayed at the hotel frequently. We went in a circle saying our names to see if the spirit, Joe, would let one of us sit in the chair. I said mine, and a light that we were using started to flicker like crazy. This is especially odd because I have red hair, and as far as I know, I was the only one in our group of Irish descent. Our guide asked if he was sure that he wanted me to sit there, and he replied, "F yeah," through the box. I took the invitation and sat in the chair, and oddly enough, I felt some kind of strange power surge through me. I eventually stood and thanked Joe, and from the spirit box I heard, "You're welcome." Later that night is when the real event happened. Our guide said, "Now, I don't normally do this, but since there are only 4 of you, I'd like to take you down to the morgue." It wasn't so much of a morgue, but it was stone walls and a dirt floor, and it was cold as hell. We were in a corner of the room when our guide said, "I don't want to scare you, but there's something standing right behind you." I saw a shadow on the wall, but it was cast by my friend B. That's when B moved to the side, and there was another shadow underneath his. It was taller than anyone in the room, and gave off an intimidating presence. I looked back, and saw no one standing in front of the light source, and when I looked back again, there was no shadow. I've always been skeptical, but believed in the supernatural to a degree. Believe me when I say that basement had something seriously dark down there. Something evil. I have never felt so vulnerable in my life. The whole night we felt like we were being watched, and could hear footsteps around the hotel. I'd love to go back and get some more evidence someday. I've done paranormal investigations for a few years now, but that one night stay at that hotel was enough to completely convince me. There is definitely something beyond death, and perhaps the most terrifying part, not everything on that side is friendly. All the guards at my workplace know this theater is haunted. We're all used to the super eerie feelings down in the lower levels, backstage areas. Most of it can be passed off as long work hour stress, but there is definitely some evil shit in this building with us. It's probably an entity that's latched itself onto themes like theatrics and whatnot. I don't know. We got all kinds of stories. We have all heard the grand piano playing on its own in the night, heard ghostly voices arguing every now and then as we walk through the halls. Sometimes I smell a harsh burning in the halls at night, like sulfur. We all know that doesn't mean well. Tonight has been the worst it's ever been. I heard a door slam shut nearby as I was patrolling, and as a joke, I yelled out, "Who it be?" Inside joke with me and my friends to lighten my nerves. And I heard a deep, almost unintelligible male voice saying, "It be me." Sounds kind of funny, but I did not enjoy that. My Bluetooth headphones blatantly refused to work tonight. I also walked through one of the function halls in the darkness. Once the building closes, we patrol without many lights on, other than the occasional safety lights here and there, and I saw something following me in the mirror. I refused to look behind me, or stare at the mirror too long, but it appeared to be a figure clearly dressed in the costume of like a king, with a fur robe and a black jagged crown. Its head was tilting side to side as it shuffled along behind me, kind of like a wind-up toy. It moved so soundlessly that I was pretty startled by it. I couldn't feel my legs out of dread, so I didn't even stop walking. I just stopped looking immediately, and calmly kept the same pace on my way out of the room, pretending to see nothing. I think this is happening due to the current performance of a really old and famous play called Faust. A very famous actor died performing it here in Melbourne a long time ago in another theater nearby, and his ghost allegedly haunts the theater to this day. It's not far down the road from our theater. There is also a secret warehouse on the site, the location of which, for obvious reasons, we do not share with the public. But this warehouse is basically a storage room full of really old and valuable artifacts that have to do with early modern theater and music. Authentic historical pieces like 18th century instruments and old chests and trunks that belong to people of fame. One-of-a-kind tapes recorded by famous rock and blues musicians, old stage set models, some dating back all the way to the 1800s. It's crazy. I know for a fact that some of these old artifacts bring with them the presence of beings potentially even older than they are. You couldn't pay me to open some of these creepy-looking trunks. Safe to say, I'm glad I'm casual now and no longer work full-time. I've been working here for almost a year. It's hands down the most haunting place that I have ever experienced. I think my paranormal story began when I was around 5 or 6 years of age. I was a shy and quiet little girl, but nothing in my life was out of the ordinary. I had both of my parents married, and a little brother 3 years younger than me that was sleeping in the same room as me. I don't know exactly how or when it all began, but things started to get weird at night in my bedroom. Every time my mother put me to bed and turned off the lights, shadows would begin to move around and scare me. By shadows, I mean black entities, like little insects crawling on the walls, standing figures with human shapes, even faces. I was so terrified of the night that I had a hard time falling asleep, and I can't recount how many times I had to turn on my little bed light to chase away the shadows that I was seeing. Nothing bad ever happened to me during those days. These shadows were always just passing by or staring at me, even though I recalled some times that were scarier than others. I remembered one particular night when I opened my eyes and there was just a face, centimeters away from mine, staring at me with dead eyes. I was on top of a bunk bed. Every time something scary would happen to me, my instinct was to turn on a light. Everything disappeared with the light, so I made a habit to save myself like this. And now, at 26 years old, I still need to turn on the lights everywhere I go because I cannot feel at ease in the dark. Of course, I told my experiences to my parents at the time, but they did not really take me seriously. I was quite imaginative for my age, so they thought it was just my silly little brain making things up. At the same time, my vision was starting to get bad and I needed to wear glasses. They used to tell me my blurred vision was creating scary monsters with the things in my room. Every time I was seeing the things in my room, I kept repeating my parents' words to soothe me, but I was still so scared, trembling, and unable to sleep because of what I was seeing. I had bad sleeping habits because of that. I had hard times closing my eyes at night, and I always tried to fall asleep before there was no light left in the house. These experiences followed me my whole childhood, but with the years passing by, they were less frequent. The fear of the dark still lingered, but I could sleep more peacefully. When I reached my teenage years, it completely stopped. At times, I was even able to completely forget this part of my life. Funny how I never thought my house was haunted. I always knew deep down that it was my problem to bear. The rest of my family never had any paranormal experiences in this house, and none of them were particularly inclined to hear about my fear of the shadows. Even though I stopped seeing things after my 12th or 13th birthday, I still had quite the instinct for the paranormal and I was able to feel if a place was bad or not. But I want to make it clear that I was not seeking paranormal thrills. In fact, I was avoiding those things like the plague. I was still very much traumatized, and I did not want to experience scary things like that ever again. So, I cannot recall if it was during my 14th or 15th birthday years, but I had my final, most horrifying encounter. I was on vacation at my friend's grandmother's house. It was quite an old house, and there were 2 beds in this bedroom for my friend and me to go to sleep. I had slept in this room many nights before without anything happening, and nothing during the evening could explain what took place next. I woke up in the middle of the night with no explanation. I don't remember having a bad dream or hearing something. I just opened my eyes in the complete darkness. The feeling of uneasiness crept in very quickly. Something was not right. I could feel it, but I wasn't sure what yet. I finally lifted my head and saw it. Words cannot describe how horrid the thing I saw was, and how terrified I felt in that instant. Just 2 meters away from me, at the end of my bed, stood a man that I can only describe as grotesque. The man had red skin, or so I thought at first, prominent eyes, and an all-teeth smile. It was standing still and staring directly at me. We looked at each other for what felt like hours with no one moving. I was able to see every detail of it. More than 10 years later, I'm able to describe it perfectly to you. Its image is still ingrained in my brain like I was marked by a hot iron. Its red skin was actually no skin at all. It was made out of muscles, and its eyes and teeth were very apparent because it had neither eyelid nor lip. Its face was horribly deformed because there were several metal pieces under its muscles that were coming out at random places. It wore a black leather trench coat. I cannot tell you how terrified that I was. My heart plummeted to my stomach and my body felt an uncomfortable hotness within. It was the first time that I was seeing something so vivid and real, and my instincts were screaming that I was in great danger. I could not take my eyes off of the red man. Somehow I knew that I should not let it out of my sight. I didn't scream or panic, but I frantically searched for the light switch that I knew was within reach. The red man was standing still, just looking back at me. I don't know why, but I knew that it was completely amused by the situation and how scared that I was. Finally, I turned on the light, and I thought that I was saved. Remember how the light always helped me chase away the shadows? Well, this time, it did not fucking work. It was still there. It was still staring at me, and I could see it more clearly than ever. It began to shift away, getting closer to my friend's bed. Speaking of my friend, of course he woke up from the light that I had just turned on. He turned toward me, asking me what was happening. I think he knew immediately that something was very wrong from the face that I was probably making and my eyes locked on something next to his bed. He kept turning his head toward the red man that I was looking at, but he obviously was not able to see it. My friend kept asking what was wrong again and again, more panicked each time he was inquiring. I was so horrified that my lips were sealed, so I was not able to respond. The whole event took less than a minute to unfold, but here I was, completely terrified and spooking my friend to death. Finally, the red man began to fade away into thin air. During all this time, it did not break eye contact with me. It did not move its arms or its legs. It just kept staring at me with its eyes, with no eyelids, and staring at me with no lips. To this day, I have no explanation for it. It was neither a vivid dream, nor a sleep paralysis, and I know what I saw. To further validate my experience, let me tell you another weird thing I experienced not many years ago related to this story. After forgetting about this horrible nightmare for a decade, I happened to tell the story to my father. I was still very surprised by how vividly I could recall the events of that night, and how I could describe its face precisely. I was in an almost trance-like state while taking a bath after that, still thinking about what had happened. I was recreating the red man's face in my head. I began to stare at my own face in the mirror, a mirror that was at least 2.5 meters away from me. I stared at myself for minutes without really thinking about it, just having the red man's face in mind. Somehow, a feeling of uneasiness began to stir in me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was at first. I kept staring at my face, in my trance-like state, until I finally realized what was not right with the situation. I was able to see my face. Remember how I told you my eyesight was bad? Well, it did not improve with time. In fact, it got really bad, and without my glasses, I can't see things clearly at all. And here I am, in my bathtub, seeing things clearly for the first time since my toddler years. I got really spooked, and the moment that I realized what was happening, I saw my vision getting blurrier and blurrier. I don't know what to make of the last story. I just wanted to tell you everything that happened to me. I have my own theories, but, again, I do not seek any truth, and I still avoid paranormal things like the plague. Well, that's about it, folks. I hope my experience was interesting to some of you. It was weird and unsettling for me to put words to these events. I feel like every time I mention these things, I put myself closer to the shadows and the red man that still haunt my nightmares to this day. As I said before, I did not experience anything relevant after my teenage years. but the fear of the dark and what it hides is still here. I work at the front desk of a hotel, and within the last 6 months, we had a guest that passed away in one of our rooms. Because of this pandemic, my boss has blocked off the room, even after deep cleaning, just to be safe. Due to the hotel business not doing well, he also had a couple of rooms cut off from power, which means that none of the electronics are working for those rooms. Now, our hotel has 2 phones up at the front, one for external calls and the other specifically for internal lines, which are only connected to the phones in each guest room. I was having a quiet day during my shift alone. Business isn't running as normal, and all the housekeepers had left for the day, and the only staff there was the maintenance guy and I. I get an internal phone call from one of the rooms and answer it as I usually do, and it's just static noises, along with an occasional cut-in between, like the noise that you get when you unplug your headphones from a device. I didn't think anything of it at first, and thought that it was a guest accidentally calling the front desk, so I waited a little bit to hang up. Then I realized that the call was from the same room where the guest had passed away, and that there was no way a call could be made from that room because the phone was unplugged. I was a little bit spooked, so I asked the maintenance guy, who was just chilling in the back office, to go and check out the room and make sure that the power was still out. He comes back and sure enough the phone is still unplugged, and he even took a picture of it. He also has a log of what rooms have power, electronics, etc. We even checked the lobby cameras to make sure that no one had gone into the rooms, and there was nothing. No housekeepers went in or out of the room at all within the past week. Just as we were done checking the camera footage, I received another call from that same exact room. And this time it was silent for a good 10 seconds or so, and then the same static noise, but this time much louder. I hung up the phone so fast, a guest asked if everything was okay. I didn't tell her. I tried to think of every scientific possible way that this could have been an internal mistake, such as an outside sales call accidentally getting caught within our internal call system, but that's just impossible to begin with, especially if the phone cord was not plugged in. I worked at a small, old hospital for a couple of years. 4 floors, only 2 floors being used, and a small ER. I was a med-surg RN working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Med-surg meant that we had patients who just had surgery, and also patients who were just sick. Most of the patients were elderly and just sick with things like pneumonia, anemia, acute kidney failure, etc. When older folks get sick, they tend to get confused and might do or say things that they normally wouldn't. But this, whatever the hell it was not cool. This was mortifying, and I'm the only one who heard it. We joked that because the hospital was so old that it was creepy, specifically on the right wing of our unit, and obviously at night. Guess who got assigned the right wing that night? I got bedtime meds ready for the old folks down there, and started walking down the hall with my med cart and charts for each patient. I'd received report from the previous day's RN that room 214 was a woman, call her Kathy, who was only 55 and in for pneumonia, completely alert and oriented. I give the patients down there their meds one by one, and yeah, I'm tired and mildly annoyed that it takes room 216 over 10 minutes to swallow a plethora of pills one by one, and then proceeded to pull out his IV that was delivering his antibiotics. I digress. So needless to say, it took me a little bit longer to get to room 214. She didn't seem upset, just tired. I did my assessment, and she was, in fact, oriented to day, time, name, and location. I said goodnight after hanging another bag of fluids. I'm hanging out in the hall with my computer documenting my assessments, and I hear something that shook me. It sounded like whispering, but I heard more than one person doing it. I cocked my head up to hear better. I mean, it's night shift and I'm tired, so I'm making sure that I actually did hear this. I followed the noise to the outside of Kathy's room, and there seems to be a full-blown whispery conversation going on with multiple people. I couldn't make out what the different voices were saying, but it sounded like chanting of some sort. I had to make sure that I was legitimately hearing these whispers that seemed like they were coming from different people and try to make sense of it. I walked slowly past her door, which was slightly cracked open. Hoping to hear things more clearly, the whisper chanting sounds only got louder, but were still unintelligible. Kathy, who had been tucked in bed and dozing off when I saw her less than 7 minutes ago, was now sitting straight up on the side of her bed, looking away from me at the wall. Doesn't sound that scary, right? Well, Kathy was unable to lift herself out of bed without assistance during my assessment. She was having labored breathing when I assessed her. Now Kathy has pulled her nasal cannula out of her nose, that plastic thing that goes around your face that has the 2 spouts that go up your nose to give you extra oxygen, and sat up in bed in less than 7 minutes without struggle, and then she stood up, still looking away. She turned and walked to the bathroom, still without seeing me. Because she was labeled a fall risk, she shouldn't be out of bed alone. I saw her profile, and her lips were not moving. But the whispers grew louder. I panicked, but kept my cool. I briskly walked to the nurse's station and asked if a nursing assistant could please help Kathy with the restroom. I normally would do it myself, but I was rather busy and Kathy was doing quite well on her own. I was sweating, freaking out, and getting further behind on my charting. The nursing aide helped Kathy and didn't report anything unusual when I asked her how she was doing. I swear I heard those voices. They were unsettling, to say the least. I requested the left wing as often as possible after that, and eventually went on to work at a larger hospital. I'm going to preface this post by saying that paranormal experiences are not unknown to me. I have seen ghosts many times over my life, and my mom claims to have seen me playing with them as a child. She was a psychic medium, so I spent a good deal of my childhood around this stuff, but those experiences are for another time. This is just to assure you that I have had experiences with the paranormal before, and that what I experienced I consider to be abnormal generally, as most of my experiences up until now have been positive, or at least neutral. This was a few years ago in my very early 20s. I'm in my mid to late 20s now. I haven't had any paranormal experiences since a little while after my mom passed away when I was a teenager. I was starting to think the things I had experienced didn't happen at all. General denial. One night, on a whim, while driving around a suburb near my house, I managed to convince my boyfriend to come with me to the local cemetery. I was going through a bit of an edgy phase and thought that going to a graveyard at night would be cool. This is a cemetery in a big city, and it's extremely large. I didn't believe in ghosts hanging around in a cemetery, so I thought that it would be fine. I believed that ghosts usually hung around the places that they died, or places where they had unfinished business, and that it was very unlikely that they would actually be in a graveyard. It was sometime in October, but not Halloween. We got to the cemetery around 11:30 p.m. We had our phones with us and were using them as torches. We hopped the fence to the cemetery and began to look at all the graves, pointing out the most interesting ones and kind of just messing around. The place was completely deserted, as cemeteries tend to be at that time of night. We walked further and further in, and entered a part of the cemetery where the graves were quite a bit larger and much older. By now it had likely been around half an hour. As we were walking down the path, my boyfriend commented that there was a strange smell lingering around, which was extremely weird, as my boyfriend cannot smell at all. He lost his sense of smell due to a bunch of infections and other problems with his ears and sinuses as a kid. I couldn't smell anything, and I have an above-average sense of smell, so we both just shrugged the experience off as just weird. Later on, I was looking at one of the graves when my boyfriend shook my shoulder and pointed at one of the largest graves a few meters into the distance. I'm terrible at knowing where people are pointing, but this time I spotted it right away. It was a little girl, I'd guess around 11 or 12 years old. She had very dark brown or black hair that looked well cared for and quite long. She was sitting on top of the grave, with her legs dangling over the edge. At first I saw her wearing a lacy white dress, like a nightgown that a rich girl might wear. It looked old, but I'm no expert, so I couldn't tell you exactly how old, but maybe the 1900s, early 1900s? I looked away to look at my boyfriend, and when I looked back, she was wearing a different dress. All I remember is that it was red, because at this point I was super scared. Something about the entire situation felt wrong to me. I felt extremely fearful, and due to the fact that ghosts were very normal for me, this was extremely unusual. I would never feel unsafe seeing a ghost in the past. It was around this time that I noticed that the cemetery was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of bats, and there were a lot of fruit bats in that area. There were no other sounds of animals, and the air felt stale and stagnant. We just stood and stared at the little girl for what felt like an eternity, weirdly transfixed, and then we both ran for it up the path at full speed. I turned for a second to see if she was still there, and she was gone completely. It made me run faster, honestly, and the whole time we were both dead silent. When we got back to our car, we sat there for ages trying to work out what we had just witnessed. We were trying to rationalize it, but as we have both had paranormal experiences before, we knew it had to be a ghost. For a few months afterward, I felt continuously like I was being watched, and had frequent nightmares about seeing the little girl in our apartment. I always felt uneasy. We eventually moved around 30 minutes away, and the feelings and the dreams stopped. I've since tried to research the ghost, but haven't had anything turn up, though there is a local ghost tour at the cemetery, and maybe the guide might know something. Ever since then, my paranormal experiences have been more frequent, and have been getting more unsettling and disturbing. My boyfriend has been experiencing things more frequently as well. In 2001, I was big into ghost hunting. I was looking online for a haunted weekend road trip destination and came across the Jefferson Hotel in Jefferson, Texas. About the only thing it said was that room 19 was quote-unquote uninhabitable. Now that really piqued my interest, so I called them up and asked if it was true. The lady at the front desk laughed and just said no, we book that room all the time. So I reserved it. I was so excited, but didn't really think that anything would happen. I'd been to several supposedly haunted hotels and B&Bs and had no results. Now, I'm not sensitive like some people. I always hear people say, I felt like someone was watching me. I have no idea what that means. The only thing I noticed when I walked in the room was a faint, musky smell of an old-fashioned perfume. I set up a recorder in the room and headed out to explore the town. It was like going back in time. If you live in Texas and are looking for a road trip, I highly recommend Jefferson. When I got back to the room, I turned off the recorder and looked out its one window to see a large bust of Thomas Jefferson in the courtyard. I then sat down on the bed to relax and watch some TV. After a bit, something caused me to look back up at the window, and I saw something. A red smudge on the glass. I frowned and got up to see what it was. I hadn't noticed any red smudges earlier. I looked closely. It was more like a streak of red in a greasy substance of some sort. Then I noticed more streaks, and then more. I gradually began to realize that these were letters. My heart began to race as I backed up to take it all in. These streaks of red were spelling out, "Help me." I kind of just collapsed on the bed, my heart still racing. I knew without a doubt in my mind that those letters were not there 15 minutes earlier. I just sat in disbelief for about 5 minutes.
Needless to say, there was not much sleep to be had that night. As I left the hotel the next morning, I was disappointed to see that there was no one behind the desk. I really needed to talk to someone. I left a note about the writing and said that I would call them on Monday. When I called, I told the woman who answered who I was, and she said, "Hold on just a moment." She put the housekeeping lady on the phone. I asked, "Did you see it?" She said, "Yes, I saw it." And then she said, "Just before you arrived, I raised the blinds and turned on the AC. There was no writing. And the strangest thing was when I attempted to clean it off. She said that it was like the letters had been engraved into the glass." I told her that I was freaked out, and she confirmed that she was too. By the way, on the way home I listened to the tape that I had had running in the room while I was gone. What I heard was the sound of the closet door angrily slamming several times and something shuffling around. But what really got to me was the sound of a woman sobbing.
I've had a few paranormal experiences in my lifetime. My mom and dad said that when I was little, they would wake up in the middle of the night to me crawling around my nursery and saying a man with glowing eyes was playing with me. They believed it was my grandfather who died when I was born a hallway away, but I haven't seen him since. Anyway, my boyfriend used to live in an old farmhouse built back in the late 1800s with roommates. None of them believed in activity, but I asked about the old barns in the house when I was staying there. I always felt unsettled in the house when I would sleep there and often would wake up at around 3:12 a.m. to pee. But one night I woke up at that time and stumbled down the hall to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the staircase, which was creaky and old, and I heard it shift. I stopped at the bathroom door and saw the face of an older man peer around the corner. I jumped into the bathroom and shut the door to pee, but felt goosebumps all up my arms and my back. I didn't feel afraid of him. He looked pretty nervous, but it spooked me really bad. I went back to bed and didn't see him again. The next time I stayed there, I woke up at the same time to pee, and I saw him standing against the wall. But this time, he actually reached his hand out to me and motioned to go downstairs. I cautiously went towards him to see him go downstairs, and I peered around the corner to see him facing the door with his hands behind his back and staring at the open field in front of him. This time I noticed that he was wearing glasses and was older, with a scruffy white beard and dirty pants and boots like he'd been working outside. My boyfriend came down and found me, so I went back to bed, but didn't sleep at all. The last time I saw him, I woke up at 3:12 yet again, and rubbed my eyes to feel a really warm sensation around my hand, as though someone with really strong, working hands was grabbing me with both of their hands. But I sat up to see nothing. My heart was beating loud, but I felt safe and calm, and I swear I heard the whisper, "I'll miss you," before I went to look for him. He was in the hallway again, and he tipped his cap before whistling and walking away. I followed him, but didn't see him anywhere, and this was the last night we stayed there before we moved to a different town, into our own home. As crazy as this sounds, I miss him, and he was a sweet soul. I hope the boys that live there don't bother him too much. I asked about him after we left, and visited my boyfriend's friends, and they said their grandfather had died before they were alive, and he was a working farmer whose wife died before him. He loved animals, and wore big bottle glasses. I really think it was him, and that since the boys didn't believe in ghosts, that he just wanted someone to be his friend.
This story is from 2013. I travel a lot for work. Before COVID. And when I do, I stay at hotels. Sleeping in a different bed doesn't bother me, as I'm mostly a sound sleeper, and I'm used to it given that I've been doing this for a while. This was a hotel in the suburbs of Chicago. From the time I checked into the room, I think it was room number 413, I have never felt such a sense of dread, despair, and claustrophobia. I am a rational person, no history of depression or mental illness, so I explained it to myself that maybe the 13 in the room number was messing with my head. But I've stayed in other hotel rooms with a 13 in my assigned room number. I had also stayed at this same property every week over the last few months, but I had never felt this way. I pondered while lying in bed if I should call the front desk and ask for another room. I didn't know what excuse that I would give to them. Everything was great with the room. The shower was fine, the room was spotless, the toilet had no issues. It was a boring, predictable, clinically consistent room like any other Marriott property. No complaints on the Wi-Fi. I couldn't bring myself to lie to the front desk and ask to be changed to another room. So I told myself I was a rational man, a husband, a father, and a protector. I decided that I was going to stay put. The uneasiness didn't lessen, so I turned on every light in the room, took out all the Bibles from the bedstands, and set them next to me. I am not of the Christian faith, and not very religious either, but I felt like I needed all the protection I could get. So I played chants on loop on YouTube from my own religion all night at low volume until I went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, worked out, showered, and went to work. The night's experience felt like a fleeting memory during the day. I had a really fun rental that week, a Mustang GT, and it was so much fun the night's memory almost felt imaginary entirely. I came back from work that evening feeling a little silly about the night before and went back to the room. In an instant, the same sense of unexplained dread and claustrophobia came flooding back. I just couldn't rationally explain it. So I went back to the routine from the night before. Lights on, chanting, Bible, Marriott Mormon Bible, all by the bed. Next evening, I spoke with the bartender and asked him if he had heard any weird complaints. He said he hadn't, but he'd ask around. When I came back the next week, I got a different room, but I checked in with the bartender. He said he had done a little digging over the weekend and picked up on gossip from the other hotel staff that some of the cleaning ladies didn't like that room and even that corner of the 4th floor. He was intrigued enough that he brought along a sensitive friend of his from his Episcopalian church and said that when she opened the door and had barely taken a step inside that she just made a 180-degree turn and came right back out. She couldn't even go inside and said that it felt heavy. The bartender said that it was enough to spook him. He said he just stood in the corridor and refused to go in after that. We kinda had a laugh about it and figured that we would Google the property address to see if there were documented murders or suicides, but there was nothing. The property changed hands a few times. There was a nearby fire with some deaths, but nothing notable as far as Google search goes. I didn't think much of it, but I have stayed more than 2,000 nights in hotels since the fall of 2013, and I have yet to experience that fear ever. I continue to rethink about the memory of my experience, trying to recount the details about the room, the week, maybe the mood at work, just so I could find something rational to explain what I had felt, and I have been unable to. I live near one of the oldest cemeteries in Portland, Oregon. It's pioneer era. The oldest graves are from the 1850s and it's still active today, funerals all the time. Anyway, I go walk and jog through there pretty often. I usually jog a couple miles and then finish up with some wind sprints. There's a spot where it's straight for about 60 or 70 yards, so I'll do 8 or 10 of these things and then quit. The spot where I usually start running from is right near the grave of a young boy who was born in 1896 and died in 1902. I've done some research, and all of his family is actually buried in a different cemetery, so I always feel a little sad about it.
His name is Carl, and it's weird maybe, but I talk to the kid's grave as I'm resting up between sprints. For whatever reason, that's the only grave in there that I've ever paid much attention to, and about the only one that I'd ever done any research on. Not sure why exactly. A couple weeks ago on Wednesday, I was doing my thing. I stopped at my normal spot, said hi to Carl, and instantly got this sickening feeling that I was in danger. I looked up at this tree, big old oak, branches around 1.5 feet in diameter. I was absolutely terrified, and I started running and got the hell out of the way. I was absolutely 100% sure that this branch was going to fall and kill me. I waited a few minutes, and came back over and started looking at this big oak tree and the horse chestnut right beside it. I couldn't decide which tree actually was going to fall, so I sort of blew it off as paranoia. Not really a credible premonition or whatever. The next day, on Thursday, I go for a run, avoiding that area. When I finished up, I went back and stopped next to Carl's grave. It was a little later than I usually go, mid-afternoon, and it's getting pretty hot out, so I wasn't really looking forward to running more. I didn't actually hear anything, but something told me you shouldn't go any further. So it's hot, I'm tired, I'm paranoid. I noped out and went home. The next day, it's Friday. I go back into the cemetery. A massive branch from the oak tree had fallen, knocked about 5 branches off of the horse chestnut. It all landed on Carl's grave and right on the part of the path that I usually jog on. Some parks workers were already cutting the trees up to clear the way. I asked one guy when it had fallen, and he said it had happened sometime on Thursday afternoon. I have no idea if I actually would have been there at that time at that spot, but it was weird enough to freak me out a little bit. Anyway, thanks, Carl. Myself, my younger cousin, and a couple of friends stayed recently at one of the most haunted places in Texas and America. As a kid, I had heard stories of this old hotel and the dark history behind it. In recent years, a few paranormal shows showcased and did some investigations there. When I saw in our local news that the Magnolia Hotel was opening back up for visitors to stay the night, I was stoked. When you stay the night, you get 2 rooms, regardless of whether you're staying by yourself or you're bringing company. Also, you get the whole second story to yourself for you to investigate. There is a door that separates the hotel, updated, side and the haunted rooms side. To be fair, the rooms that you stay in are haunted as well. The entire hotel is haunted. Needless to say, I recorded so much activity on tape and in person in my own experiences. The findings I have will raise the hairs on your body. I was hearing voices, seeing shadows, hearing footsteps, showing the EVP sessions and hearing our names. I actually got touched twice, and the second time was so chilling. We were outside of this room that had a ton of activity. My friend had the dowsing rods. She asked if there was a spirit, and 3 times it pointed directly at me. She asked if the spirit was next to me. The rods said no. She asked if it was behind me, and they said yes. At that moment, I felt someone grab my right shoulder and slowly move their hand down my back. I got cold chills and felt tingling and numbing for a good few minutes. I am planning to go back very soon. I am a sensitive. I attract ghosts, and I go ghost hunting quite a bit. I have other experiences from several places that are extremely haunted here in Texas and in other states as well. On May 9th of this year, I went to a flea market to browse. I passed by a clear cabinet that held an assortment of old antique dolls, and I was particularly drawn to an old, cracked doll wearing a hat with feathers. As I examined her closer, I noticed that she had a cloth body, but her arms, head, and legs were made of the same type of plastic, or possibly porcelain. I felt very drawn to her and was surprised by her price, only $35. She wasn't in very good condition, and was clearly ancient, based on the cracks on her body and the way that her face is painted on. I returned to the cashier with the doll, and immediately the workers who had been deep in conversation halted and fell quiet. They proceeded to tell me a little more about the doll, who supposedly hexes anyone who inconveniences her. This only made me feel more inclined to purchase her, as someone who is very interested in the paranormal, and as it is part of my faith, Wicca. So I ended up buying her. My younger sister, 11, wasn't very happy that I had bought the doll, whose name was Madame Leonora. She felt very thrown off by the doll's presence and requested that the doll be placed in the trunk on the ride home. I didn't want to upset the doll in case I got hexed, but my parents insisted that I put the doll in the trunk. So I did. That same day, I almost went to the hospital after an accident at my home. Similar disturbing events happened around the home whenever someone insulted Madame or did something she didn't like. These events pose a possible trauma trigger for some people, so I won't specify what the events were here. Just know that they were serious, and they were awful. I began giving Madame gifts and saying good morning and good night to her every day. On the first day that I gave her a gift, a package that I hadn't been expecting for another 2 weeks came in the mail. Every time I give her a gift, she gives me good luck. Madame and I had formed a friendship, but towards late June I began having strange, very specific dreams. In these dreams, Madame would climb down off of the shelf where she lives and escort me outside. We'd light candles and perform a ritual, and then I would bury Madame in a box with the gifts that I had given her over the months. As soon as the dream ends, I wake up. So, with the knowledge that I have because of my Wiccan faith, I decided to hold a seance of sorts in order to communicate with the spirit hosting my doll. I lit a candle and used a pendulum with a board to communicate. The candle flame responded to everything I said, and I have never seen such clear responses through my pendulum before. Based on what I got out of the session, Madame was able to tell me that she would like to be buried, but won't reveal to me why. I've never sensed any negative energy around Madame before, but with each passing day, the air in my room feels heavier, if that makes any sense. I'd like to fulfill her wish and bury her because I think she may be a Victorian mourning doll, but the vendors who sold her have no information on her at all, only that she makes bad things happen. If she is indeed a Victorian mourning doll, it would make sense why she wants to be buried. The only problem is that she refuses to tell me why I have to bury her. If anyone can tell me if there's any danger to burying her, if there's anything I should know about this, or what I can do to identify what time period she's from, I'd really appreciate the help.
I've worked 3.5 years now as a psych tech at a unit that covers the southeast portion of my state. The unit I work on you can think of as the ER for psych. We admit individuals who are having mental breaks or who need help for self-harm, being disabled from their psych disorder, or harming others. The unit is freaking old, and has been around since the time of Moses, it seems. Even though weird events go on, it's a pretty awesome job helping others, and I love working here while I finish going to school. I will say to start out with, that most nights on the unit are really quite boring. Naturally, with the type of individuals that can stay here, the unit can have a change in its feeling rather quickly though. I've had individuals who I've never met before know strange things about me or other patients, such as where I've buried my dogs, names of family members, or the streets that I've grown up on. You'll get a weird vibe walking by certain patients. At times, my patients will say creepy stuff, such as being told the devil has sent its demons to watch me and not mess up. I witnessed a lady who came in for suicidal thoughts slowly progress to sitting in a corner and screaming "no, stop" till she couldn't talk. This lady shouted and shrieked the same phrases over and over in an empty room. The unit also has one room that I dislike because no matter who gets assigned to stay in that room, they always seem to get much worse before they get better. The room is always cold, even when the heat comes through the vent. I can recall 4 patients asking to switch rooms because the shadows in the room surround them when they sleep and buzz at them at night. My most recent experience was while doing my safety check in an unoccupied room which had the door open. Previously in the shift, I knew it was locked because I had checked all the unused rooms to make sure that they were indeed closed and locked. I thought housekeeping had come up to clean the room possibly, since a patient was discharged from in there the night before. Next thing I knew, I had a soap bar and a shampoo bottle thrown at me. It wasn't a joke throw either, but a rip right at me. The door slammed shut. I think a patient is in there now. I open the door to a completely empty, clean room. I lock it up, pick up the soaps, and try to tell the other tech that I'm working with what had happened. We pull up the camera and sure enough you can watch that event unfold in the hall. Not all experiences are bad or evil on the unit. The patients will sometimes tell me that they had family that's passed on stay the night in their room and visit with them until they fall asleep. Another time I had one patient tell me that a giant white figure stood guard by their door and kept the shadow figures from coming in until they were finally able to doze off. We do have regular figures that walk the yard and hang out in the rooms. One we call the engineer because the figure is always being seen in the utility closet. The mysterious stranger resembles a character out of a game. He's a tall guy in a tannish trench coat and business hat walking the same path around 3 a.m. and disappears after he passes by a big elm tree. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. Before you come onto the unit, there's a fairly large gym to play basketball, lift weights, or exercise, which low-risk patients can use with a staff member. On my 4th meal break, I usually eat and do a little working out. The gym also has a radio to hook up your phone to and to jam some music. This particular time, I'm shooting hoops and listening to Metallica. My break ends, so I put the ball away and unplug my phone to leave. As the music cuts, I hear a soft voice say, "Keep playing." Similar story from a coworker from the same place. When she turned the music off, she heard someone picking up singing where the song had stopped. Apparently, they also enjoy music just as much as the rest of us.
It was my last year of college, and after getting dumped by my first significant girlfriend the year before, I ended up involved with a woman who lived next door. It was not a healthy relationship for either of us, but I think we cared for each other despite not always being good to each other, and we somehow stayed involved for like a year. One morning while we were brushing our teeth and getting ready for the day at her place, she mentioned a video assignment due in a couple of days. She grew up in a large city and was unfamiliar with the sleepy New England region that we went to college in, but she knew that I had gone to high school about an hour away and had family in the area, so she was hoping that I might be able to suggest somewhere interesting to get footage. I suggested that my parents were buried in a pretty cemetery near the high school in town, and that I hadn't stopped to pay my respects for a bit, so I'd be happy to drive her over there after classes. She liked the idea, and we agreed to meet up in the afternoon, grab some dinner, and go by the graveyard so that she could take her footage. Only we kind of screwed up. It was probably late fall by that point, and the days were getting noticeably shorter. If I remember right, service was slow at the restaurant too. By the time we were getting into my hand-me-down Dodge Grand Caravan to head out to the graveyard, the sun was going down. Not ideal for shooting some quick, amateur footage for video class. As I said, the graveyard was near the high school, which was a little outside the town proper. You passed the school, and then there was this windy road kind of into the woods and up a sizable hill or small mountain overlooking their football field. About halfway up, there was a turn off into the cemetery. It was a peaceful little spot, and my grandparents had plots next to each other. I had visited a lot in the daytime in my first couple of years of college. My grandmother had passed away when I was in high school, but my grandfather lived on a few more years until passing away early into my first years of college. Since I was nearby, I visited him a fair bit as his health began to decline, and in retrospect, I really value those opportunities to spend some one-on-one time with him, even if I feel a little guilty for not appreciating it at the time. I was a snotty 19-year-old and didn't realize what a cool guy that he actually was, and how lucky that I was to be part of his life in that way. After he died, I continued to stop by the cemetery several times a year to check on their grave sites and pay my respects. I had been to the cemetery a lot, but never after sundown. There were two entrances. The main one that took you through the center of the graveyard, and a side entrance that led out onto a little road, just big enough for one car that was a straight shot to my grandparents' plots. To the left of this little gravel road was an open field with newer-looking graves, and to the right was a more overgrown area with older-looking headstones, and the real tree line for the woods beyond that. Even in daytime, because of the brush and the shade from the trees, it always looked dim off that way, and my sister and I had both remarked about how it was kind of creepy over there. So this woman I was seeing and I were driving to the cemetery at sundown, just hoping that we'd be able to get in and figure out how to get some footage for her assignment. The main gate was locked, but the side entrance was open, which was better for us anyways, since it was the more direct route to my grandparents' graves. I pulled the minivan in slowly, careful to stay off the grass as much as possible, and we stopped and got out at the intersection nearest to where my grandparents were buried. She got the camera she had checked out from the school's library equipment room, and was trying to get some footage of the headstones or something while I walked over to say hi to my grandparents. Only it was too dark, and after a couple of minutes she asked if I would turn the headlights on to see if the light would help her get something usable. Not knowing how long we'd be out there, and not wanting to drain the battery, I decided to just go ahead and turn on the engine too. After a few more minutes, the van started acting weird. It wasn't a new vehicle. My parents had bought it before I was in high school and had given it to me years before, so I was pretty familiar with the sound of the engine idling. That night in the graveyard, the engine began to make unfamiliar noises. It was very high-pitched and loud for an idling vehicle. That immediately raised concern for me because the last thing that I wanted was for the van to break down in the middle of the cemetery where we may or may not have been trespassing. I started to walk back toward the van to investigate. As I walked toward it, though, the headlights began to flicker rapidly. It was sort of an inconsistent strobing effect, which was like a what the heck kind of thing. They had never done that before, and never did it after. Same with the engine noise. Then I heard something even more disturbing. To my side, off in the wooded area with the older graves, something started moving around in the brush. I looked, and in the darkness, I swear, I saw movement to accompany the sound. I couldn't see what it was too dark, but something was coming slowly towards us out of those woods. I instantly felt as if it was time to go, and that we shouldn't be there. Fortunately, my companion agreed, even though she hadn't got enough footage, because she heard the approaching rustling as well. We got into the van, which continued to sound really weird, but thankfully it went into gear and drove normally as we got the hell out of there. The lights stopped flickering as I got turned around, and the engine sound returned to normal as we approached the gate. The most rational explanation for the rustling was an animal, but that didn't explain the van acting so strangely. I kept it for another 6 months before trading it in, and it never made noise like that while idling again, and the headlights were always reliable, never flickering. I also have had other strange experiences in my life, but this was the first and only time I ever felt that overwhelming sense that I had to leave or that I shouldn't be somewhere. I can't help but wonder if both my sister and I had always thought that wooded spot off to the right was spooky for a good reason, and if I might have found out what that reason was had my companion and I stayed for a few more minutes that night. I, a 23-year-old female, just wanted to share what I would call my first real encounter. Even as a lifelong skeptic, I can't explain this. If you're familiar with U.S. ghost hunting spots, you might have heard of the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona. It has been open since 1902 and has been the subject of multiple paranormal investigations and shows, and there are supposedly 3 documented ghosts who inhabit it. That of a drowned child, a man in a top hat, and a forlorn prostitute. My boyfriend and I decided on Saturday morning that we would take a trip to make up for a missed birthday. We had never gone on a real trip together, so we didn't plan it well at all. We just realized that we were about an hour and a half from Bisbee and decided to book a hotel once we got there. We chose the Copper Queen because it was the most prominent hotel in the area and is right in the middle of everything. We weren't aware of its reputation as a paranormal hotspot. The room itself was antique-looking, as expected with a hotel that old. Yellowing wallpaper, splintering wood floors, dim lighting. The locks on the door were pretty flimsy, and you had to actively yank it shut or it would fall open again. We joked that it looked like the Tower of Terror. After a day of walking around, we came back to get changed. We heard a creaking noise, and I had Coop check under the bed, only half seriously, but I was still relieved that nobody was there. We grabbed a lighter and went out for a smoke, then came back, showered, watched TV for a little while, and then turned out the lights. The moment that we shut the lights off, there was a variety of clicks, creaks, and pops in odd patterns. It being an old room, and us being a logical couple, we figured that it was the old fan or the wall-mounted AC. I was just listening to the noises when I felt Coop freeze up next to me. "Is that you?" I responded no, that it was the AC. "Not that. Seriously, is that you?" I asked him what he meant and waited for a minute or so before asking again and again. Finally, he answered, "I was trying to listen, babe. I hear someone breathing." We reasoned that it was the room next door and settled back into our pillows, and then I remembered that there wasn't another room on that side. Our room was the first on the landing, and the side that we were closest to, the side that Coop would have been able to hear, if at all, was the main staircase. Coop, being a 21-year-old boy, is blessed with the ability to fall asleep within seconds. I could hear him snoring, and his legs were over mine, but I was too anxious to sleep. I then felt the lightest tap on top of the quilt, just next to my feet. I froze, but tried to reason with myself that Coop had just twitched in his sleep, although his legs were still on top of mine. A few moments passed and I thought that I had imagined it, and then I felt a pinch/tugging motion at the same area of the quilt. I woke up Coop and demanded that he check under the bed again. I was still reasoning that there was a non-supernatural explanation for the events, and it occurred to me that although we had checked before leaving our walk, we hadn't checked after. The flimsy lock and the fact that the door was difficult to close made it seem likely that someone could have snuck in. Coop was too groggy to be useful, so I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, and leapt as far from the bed as I could while crouching to check what was under it. Nothing. We were both a little freaked out by this point and agreed to turn the TV back on to drown out any weird noises. We turned on Futurama and settled back into bed for the 3rd time. Again, Coop fell asleep within seconds. I was drifting off when I heard the audio on the TV kind of cut somehow. It suddenly shifted tone to where it sounded like a grainy VHS instead of a streaming adult cartoon. I heard a woman saying something about a phantom, and then a blood-curdling scream from the TV. At this point, I was too scared to open my eyes, so I studied my breathing and pretended to be asleep. That's the last event that I could recall, and upon checking out the next day, the manager asked if we had experienced anything. That's when we Googled the hotel and found out its history of hauntings. So there it is. Nothing too crazy compared to other posts here, but I have definitely never experienced anything like that before and don't have an explanation besides the paranormal. I always visit my son at the cemetery, usually at night. I love how peaceful it is there, and just look at the clear, starry sky. Today has been a rough day for me. I cried and prayed on my way to the cemetery. First, I noticed how bright that the moon is tonight. I usually have to use my phone's flashlight so that I could see where I'm going. Not tonight. My son has a toy box on his grave. Letters, books, and toys are inside. It's a little plastic tote. The lid wasn't there when I got there tonight. It was on the ground. Today's weather wasn't really nice. Everything must be wet, I thought. But no. The card and the letter that's sitting on the very top were dry. The teddy bear was dry. It couldn't have been the wind because the papers were there. I don't know if someone opened it and left it open, or something else. Nothing was taken, and nothing was moved. Tonight, I'm sitting here at the cemetery, totally at peace. Most of this stuff happened to me between the ages of 10 and 18. I've posted before about my haunted school, and I'd like to share more of what I've heard. Whatever these things are, they have really enjoyed screwing with me periodically. I was 17 and had just gotten home from some event, either with a church group or some friends, I don't recall. It was about 11 p.m., and as mandated, I woke my parents up to let them know that I was home and alive. Don't remember why I felt the need to shower that night, but I did. The shower was a stall with a glass door and really high-pressure steam, which was almost deafening in that plastic stall. You would have to shout at me right next to the bathroom door in order for me to hear you, so that's why what happened next was so shocking. Mid-shower, there was this loud, blood-curdling female scream that I could hear from inside the shower. I had never heard someone scream like that in real life, and it paralyzed me for a second. I have 2 sisters, and so I immediately thought the worst. I busted out of the shower, ran to my parents' room dripping wet, wearing only a towel, fully expecting my parents to be getting up to see who was screaming. The house wasn't that big, just a double-wide trailer with an addition. I was shocked to find them in bed asleep still. Their door was open. If I heard the scream, then they should have really heard it, especially since neither of them are heavy sleepers. I woke them quickly and asked if they had heard that scream, which they didn't. Mom was concerned, and Dad hopped out of bed and we checked on my siblings. All sound asleep. So then we searched the house and even looked outside. Nothing. He usually gets annoyed and upset when I talk about the paranormal. He had to exorcise some evil spirit from a room when he was on his mission at age 20, so he prefers to have them just not exist at our house at all, and no scary movies. But this time he was pretty calm, probably because he could tell how upset that I was. I wasn't dreaming, hallucinating, or making it up, and he knew it. I was standing naked with a towel, nearly hyperventilating and still dripping from the shower. Dad tried to comfort me, telling me it was probably just a cat outside. Yeah, really. He didn't believe it, but that's what he was selling, so I better buy it. I really had nothing else to do but go to bed, down in the basement where most of the activity occurred, but you bet your butt I didn't sleep much. Whatever it was that was screaming would bug me periodically. I was the only one in the basement, so naturally, I was the only witness. I have lots of stories that my family still won't believe.
I've always had some kind of interest in the paranormal. As someone who grew up in a religious household but has always struggled with the concept of faith, I think what's always drawn me to it is the idea of proof. Proof of something beyond this life. Proof that death isn't the end. So I guess that's what set me up for this experience. This was 4-ish years ago on an October night. This happened with 2 friends of mine who I'll call Jim and Lisa. I've known Jim since 2nd grade, and Lisa since high school. Lisa and I went to the same college for a bit, and we had a mutual interest in the paranormal. Given the time of year that it was, close to Halloween, we decided to go and do some ghost hunting of our own. I called up Jim, who also had some interest, and planned to meet up and drive to a local cemetery not far from where we were. So this place definitely has the spooky factor to it. It's on a residential road, but the section the cemetery is in is really wooded and separated from everything. It's set back on a hill, and carved into the hillside right up against the road are the keeps that they used to lay bodies out in when the ground was too frozen to do burials back in the day. Jim and I had scoped this place out during the summer during the day because it was close to where he lived, so I kinda knew the layout. We all met up and parked next to it. I had brought a voice recorder from school. I worked at the school radio station, so it was fairly nice. We started walking around and asked some innocuous questions. Lisa claimed to be sensitive, which I'm skeptical of, but that will come into play a little later. As we were walking around, kind of creeped out, we walked toward the back of the cemetery. It goes fairly far back, so we were poking around reading stones with flashlights when Lisa and I could swear that we heard someone walking around near the middle of the cemetery. All 3 of us were together near the back, and there was 1000% not anyone else out there. Could it have been some college kids hyping themselves up? Maybe. It's hard for me to really confirm with hindsight whether we were being overly imaginative, but we were pretty sketched out. After about 15 to 20 minutes, we figured that we should pack it up. Lisa and I were kind of freaked out still because we were fairly convinced that something was walking around near the center of those headstones. She also kept saying that she felt like something was compelling us to leave, and that we weren't welcome. Jim was kind of indifferent and wasn't really noticing anything super crazy, so we started making our way down the hill. This is when a weird thing happened. As we were walking down the hill, I heard a stone skip past me as if someone had kicked or thrown it. I figured that it was just Jim, as he's apt to do that sort of thing. But as I looked and was about to say something to him, he was about 10 feet to my left. He definitely didn't kick anything at me. The weirdest stuff that we found was on the recorder when we got back. I want to make this clear, this was not a super windy night. There was a light breeze at best. But the recorder sounded like it was windy as hell because we caught a ton of what I call interference. It was really deep bass tones that sounded like the microphone on the recorder were being overloaded. The creepy part was that there were times where there was a rhythmic quality to it, like something was speaking but couldn't get through fully. I'd say it sounds like when someone's talking in another room with the door shut, where you can hear the noise, but not much in the way of actual words. I did get it on the other investigations with this recorder, but never at that level. So while it's possible that it could have been an issue with the recorder, I'm not entirely sure. We also got some really direct, creepy EVPs. Toward the end of our time there, you can hear me on the recorder saying, "Hey guys, we should go," in reference to the creepy walking sounds from the middle of the cemetery. During the discussion from the three of us, there's a moan that's pretty audible that no one heard while we were there. It sounded like something was upset that we were leaving. This was reinforced by a minute later when Lisa asked, "Do you want us to leave or do you want us to stay?" And a voice pretty clearly answered, "Stay. I want you to stay," which was creepy enough to hear in general, but the whispery quality to it makes the hair raise up on the back of my neck. The epilogue to this is Lisa claimed that there was weird stuff happening all around her house the weekend after we went. Banging on the wall, noises in the other rooms. Full disclosure, Lisa does have a bit of history with mental illness, so I guess you might could chalk it up to that. The part that gives me pause is that we were talking about this at school one day and her sister called from the house complaining about all the weird crap that was happening. While I think her sister also has some sort of history, I think it's mostly anxiety-based, but I'm not 100% sure honestly. I do find it a stretch that her sister would call and make a big deal out of it if stuff wasn't legitimately taking place. I only wish that I'd gone to the house and experienced whatever it was firsthand just to see for myself. I travel to many different cemeteries for work in Massachusetts. I'm a grave salesperson and go to these cemeteries on an as-needed basis. One day I was finishing up a sale and decided to use the bathroom in the tiny office shed in the back of the cemetery. The door to enter the office was locked, but the bathroom door was broken and wouldn't close all the way. I didn't care that the bathroom door wouldn't really close because no one was coming into the office anyway. It was late and all the groundsmen had went home for the day. Just as I was finishing my business, the bathroom door slams shut, and since the knob was broken, the door just bounced and swung open. My first reaction was that someone had entered the office and the air pressure had sucked the door open. I run out and see that no one had come in. There were no open windows to cause a breeze. This door just slammed and opened all on its own. I was shaken up, but I still had some paperwork to complete. I acknowledged that there may be a presence in the room with me, but I didn't want to appear frightened of it. So I sat down in there for a few minutes and took my time finishing my work. Nothing has happened there since then, but I always acknowledge the entity as if it's watching over the place. I work in a place with 5 floors and a basement. It used to be a house for nuns and priests. I have divided the story into small parts describing everything I've seen on each floor. I got called up for a night shift since a colleague called in sick. I've never done a night shift here, so I took up the opportunity to see what it was like. 4th floor. Doing your rounds isn't the creepiest thing at all. The creepiest thing is going down the stairs again. You will see a black figure walking the hallway. Just your average shadow, you know. Well, thing is, the lift sometimes randomly goes to that floor during the night, as if someone is calling it. 3rd floor. Doing your rounds gets a little weirder here, since it seems as though you aren't alone whilst on the floor. You will hear footsteps and see shadows on the wall walking past you. 2nd floor. Exactly the same as 3rd floor except for one painting. It has a woman in it that sometimes changes position or even completely disappears. 1st floor. You will sometimes hear the piano play a D note on the floor above you. Main floor. There is a black leather couch in the hallway where you will sometimes find a see-through man sitting with a cigar and newspaper. He smiles and disappears when you greet him. Basement. The helpful poltergeist resides here. This is the place where before my current company took up the building, the morgue was. There currently are our storage rooms, but the rooms aren't marked with what is in them.
But that doesn't matter, because the night shift always gets knocks on the door to indicate where the item is. I've always felt that someone was watching me, always with me, just watching, but nobody was to be seen. It was one night during a November break after my birthday, around 2:30, when I started to feel sick, so I got up to use the bathroom. My room was in the basement right next to my parents'. I left my room, and we have this hallway. I walked down, and it was pitch black. I was going up to the door that leads to the stairs, and for a quick second, there was just a girl standing there, and then she just floated up and disappeared. I was so scared, but I really had to use the bathroom, and we only have one that was upstairs, so I continued my journey and used the bathroom. It took me about 20 minutes to get my head together, and then I went back downstairs to bed. Since I moved into this house, 3 a.m. has always been scary to me because I hear a lot of things, and my parents just think that I'm crazy. But the clock hit 3 a.m. I was already scared for my life, and I said, I'm just going to try to go to bed. I tried for about 10 minutes, and it felt like I was being watched still, so I said, "Hello, is anybody there?" No one answered. But a moment later, my painting fell off the wall and hit the shelf that was holding my mirror, to fall and shatter. I've always had a spooky feeling about that mirror, and I was crying in fear. After I calmed down, around 3:50, I was going to bed again, and I felt a tug on my foot, but just pushed it away. After the third time, I sat up and saw the same girl from earlier. Her bright green eyes glowed, but her long, blue, scruffy dress was beautiful. It was scary, but I felt like I've seen her somewhere, or she looked really familiar to me and looked like a younger version of me. Ever since then, I haven't heard a word or peep out of anything, but I still feel her presence. This was a pretty surreal experience for me, and the few people that I've told agreed that perhaps someone was watching over me and warning me. A couple of years ago, I lived in a place close to the sea. At night, I used to take my dog down through the town center to the seafront for a nice walk. I eventually discovered that there was a small graveyard with gates on either side which I could cut through. I kind of like walking through graveyards, especially at night, because it is creepy in a very cool kind of way. I did this quite a lot, and never once felt afraid. However, one night I was walking up to the gates, and I felt the strongest feeling of dread. No reason for it. Nothing was different. But it was like something was screaming at me to not go through. Do not walk through the graveyard tonight. I didn't. I turned around and went the other way. It was such a bizarre sensation, given that before I had walked there plenty of times without meeting anyone, with nothing happening. I genuinely believe that if I had ignored that and walked on through, something would have happened. Who knows what, or what was lurking there that night. I never went that way again. Some people have told me that I had a guardian angel who was warning me of the danger. If you live in North Carolina, then you've heard of Gravity Hill. You can look it up to get information about it. One night it was me, my boyfriend, and 3 of his cousins, and we thought it would be fun to drive out to Gravity Hill and test it for ourselves. Something did, in fact, push us up the hill. Cody's car was in neutral, but something did push us up. And as we got to the top, Cody asks us if we want to go to the house. I asked what it was, and all four of them said, in sync, that I had to see it for myself. We drove up there, and as we got to it, it's this very old, abandoned white house. I'd say it was probably built in the late 40s, early 50s, but no one's lived in it for years. I asked him to pull into the driveway, and he did. We sat there for a minute. I wanted to see if anything would happen because I didn't believe them. We were in the driveway for 3 minutes at most when Cody said, "I'm about ready to leave. What about y'all?" As soon as he said that, his headlights dimmed so much we thought they went out. I saw someone in the upstairs window only for a second, but someone or something was standing there watching us. It frightened me so much that it brought tears to my eyes and I was shaking. We sped off and didn't look back. I still remember the feeling of all my energy leaving my body, and I never want to experience something like that ever again.
Moving from a small town to a large city at a fairly young age had to be one of the biggest adjustments I've ever had to make. I knew no one. I had no idea how different it really was. I had no reason to think about it before we had to move. Not only was the way of life much different, but so were the people and the experiences. There were so many more buildings, cars, and people in general. And the dangers that lurked only just began to come so real for me. I've always had strange things happen to me that couldn't be explained, but I would always just shrug them off. I would play it off as if I was just tired most times and making myself see things that were not really there. Besides, I had no one to talk to about these strange encounters, and I was a young teenager. Who would really believe these outrageous things that I would just seemingly come up with? The church-going family that we were just wouldn't allow for such nonsense. The Lord protects us from all evil, that kind of jazz. On moving to the city, I eventually got settled after some time of rebelling. I was your normal, typical teenager, and I was angry because I felt like I had been made to leave my friends behind. I got into a lot of trouble and fell into all the wrong crowds. The whole stereotypes that people have of teenagers. I seemed to allow myself to live up to that stereotypical standard. I knew that what I was doing was wrong, but I didn't care. I found myself in some sticky situations that finally led me to a friend that showed me that what I was doing wasn't getting me anywhere with my life. For this story, we'll call him Bob. Bob was an older man. He was, I would say, at least 12 years older than I was. I was 13 at the time that we met. He had moved in downstairs from us with a friend of his that my parents knew. We met while helping his friend move furniture out of his apartment to have his carpets cleaned. Fast forward some time and Bob and I became close friends. Yes, it was odd myself being friends with someone so much older than I was, but somehow it worked at the time. There was this cemetery that was up the street from our apartment complex. We would go there regularly to visit graves and help clean them and place flowers on those that were unmarked to show that someone still cared for these people. We would always go during the day. It was such a beautiful and peaceful place. There were many rose bushes, green grass, tall shrubs, and some really pretty water fountains spread out across this large piece of land. It was easy to just stroll around there all day and lose track of time completely. One day we came upon this one tall mass grave that was unmarked. It was so old that the headstone was crumbling, and the lot that it was on was caving in and had a hole about a foot or so deep just underneath the concrete slab. We were both curious about it and would visit the grave a few times this one week. We weren't sure what it was about this grave that drew us back to it each time, but we visited this person quite often. I can recall this time that we had gone later in the day. It was just an hour or so until it got dark. We were never there when it was dark because they locked the gates, and if they found you there after a certain time, they would kick you out. But they never saw us or bothered to tell us to leave. We were, of course, at this unmarked grave once again. Nighttime had finally fallen, and it was pretty dark. There were a few lights in the cemetery, but it was just a soft glow that filled the area we happened to be at. Bob and I wandered around that unmarked grave and were admiring the other headstones around it. We just couldn't believe how old that they actually were. We ended up circling back, getting ready to head home. We walked back past the unmarked grave to say goodbye. I remember standing there on the side of the grave where the hole was. I was just thinking, how could they not fix this, and wondered how far down that it went. Being the curious idiot that I was, I kneeled down next to this hole and decided to stick my arm into it. It was so deep that you couldn't feel any kind of gravel or soil below. I guess Bob had just kept walking, so there I was with my hand in this hole below this concrete slab. I stood up and went to turn around to walk toward Bob. He was a ways off in the distance, but I could still see him. Before I could take a step, though, I felt like my body wasn't moving. It was as if someone had a huge hold on me. I couldn't move, and I couldn't speak. I was stuck. Bob finally notices me standing where he left me and starts yelling for me to come on, but there was no moving for me, and I felt this grip just getting tighter and tighter. It felt like forever watching as Bob made his way back in my direction, going on about how he wanted to get home, how it was late. He was standing in front of me and looked at me like I'd completely lost it. He had been talking to me and asking me questions, and I, of course, could not move or make a sound. He reaches out to grab me to pull me along, and I didn't budge. As we stood there, he kept talking to me, seemingly thinking that I was messing with him, and he was laughing. Tears began to roll down my face. All I could think about was, how am I going to get this thing to let me go? Did I make it mad? I just kept apologizing in my head, saying how sorry I was for disturbing them, and that if they let me go that I would never bother them again. I'm assuming that they must have known that I was sorry for what I did. I drop to the gravel, and I quickly bolt up and take off running. I ended up leaving Bob behind. He came knocking on my door the next day to ask what happened. I had no idea how to even explain what I had experienced. All I know is that I have never bothered that grave again. My boyfriend and I decided to take an impromptu trip to Gettysburg and booked a decently priced hotel the night before. The first night I fell asleep no problem, but the second night, not so much. He had already gone to bed, and I had just shut the light off. As soon as the light was out, I could hear paper or bags shuffling around on our TV stand, and I thought that he had gotten up to look for something. I looked up, and of course no one was there, but I instantly felt terrified and felt the presence of someone standing at the foot of our bed. It only lasted about a minute or so, and then suddenly there was a loud bang, like a door being slammed in the room above us, and the feeling disappeared. When we got home, my boyfriend, who doesn't believe in the supernatural at all, extremely reluctantly brought up how the first night that we stayed, he got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and immediately got creeped out and thought that someone was in our room. He went into the bathroom and felt like someone was standing directly behind him. Of course, Gettysburg has tons of history, but after doing some research, I haven't found much information about the hotel or what may have been there before. Whatever happened in our room didn't feel harmless, though. I can't get this experience out of my head, no matter how many years have passed. This happened way back in the early 2000s. I was in the 8th grade and we were on a trip. I stayed in a hotel with 2 other girls. One of them was my friend and another girl who we were just somewhat acquainted with. The first night in the room, during my shower, I felt like someone was behind me, like standing really close to my back under the shower spray. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. So I continued showering, but the feeling just got worse. When I finished my shower, I pulled open the curtain, and when I looked up at the gigantic wall mirror, I saw a grotesque face behind my right shoulder. It was gone within seconds. I think I stood frozen there for a whole minute before I practically ran out, screaming. The next day, we were getting ready to go out. The girl we roomed with said that someone was in our room last night. She heard the toilet flush, the sink turn on, but then nothing. No one entered the room. No one left. And no one else but us was in there to begin with. We know because we checked every nook and cranny after she told us. The second night, when we got back to our hotel room, I suddenly felt super sleepy, like I literally fell to the floor once I stepped inside. It was odd because I wasn't sleepy at all until we actually walked into the room. The other two couldn't move me since I had an extra 50 pounds on them, so they just covered me up with the blanket, put a pillow under my head, and left me there. Then my friend said that sometime during the night I had gotten up, used the bathroom, and crawled into the bed. But I don't remember doing that. In fact, when I woke up on the third day, I was still on the floor. The story I'm about to tell happened when I was little, so basically it's my mother's and my uncle's version of it. When I was 4 years old, I was really sick. I basically couldn't digest the food that I ate, so my body had no defenses. I even spent weeks in intensive care at the hospital. The thing is, nobody knew what was wrong with me. For a year, 3 different doctors were trying to figure out what was happening. They made me do a lot of tests, even for rare conditions, but they were always negative. My mom was completely desperate. In her own words, "You were gonna die before I could even figure out what was taking you away." One day, my mom was with me at my uncle's house. He's my dad's brother, and he lives with his wife and the mom of his wife, who was like a grandmother to me. So this old woman told my mom that she was beginning to think that I was possessed by a spirit. I live in a place with a lot of esoteric beliefs and traditions, especially followed by the old people. She asked my mother if she remembered going to the cemetery while she was pregnant with me. At that moment, my mother remembered that she had gone to bring flowers to her father's grave on the day of All Saints. There's a legend here that if you go to the cemetery while you're pregnant, or with a newborn baby, the spirits will try to possess it so that they can get to live again. My mom and uncle threw me into the car to take me to a church known for such cases. They said that I was screaming and crying the whole way in the back of the car. "Let me get out, I don't want to go there." I didn't even know where we were going, or why, since they didn't tell me anything. My uncle was driving, and suddenly, we hit a traffic jam. He tried to slow down the car, and then he realized that the brakes weren't responding. He kept stepping on the brakes without the car responding until we were about to hit the car that was standing right in front of us. All of this happened in a matter of seconds. Then the car stopped completely, just inches away from colliding. When we were sitting still, the strangest thing of the trip happened. They both felt as if several people from the outside of the car were pushing the car, shaking it to one side and the other. I was still screaming. Long story short, we arrived to the church. I didn't want to come in, but I finally did. I was crying all the time. When we got out, I was in a much better mood. My mom bought me donuts on our way to the car. I ate one and then puked, but it was as if I had puked up something with sandy texture. Something completely dry. My uncle stopped the car and got me out in case I was going to keep getting sick. Suddenly, I did a strange sound. It was like a burp, but way too loud and deep sounding for a small 4-year-old kid.
I should start by saying that I am sensitive, but have never known about or tried any of my abilities to sense the paranormal. I recently stayed at the Stanley Hotel in New York. After pulling onto the property, I immediately felt extremely uneasy and had a sense of dread. Just an overall bad feeling about the place. After entering the building, I started feeling nauseous and lightheaded like I was going to pass out, and weird stabbing pains were all around my head. Not a normal headache. As the night progressed, I started getting flashing images in my head depicting horrible, violent, graphic scenes of myself being stabbed and choked, and figures who were standing over me. I felt as if I weren't alone in my own head. I felt random bursts of anger and sadness and would want to either hurt the people that I was with or just start hysterically crying. I have never felt so out of control, like my head was in a fog, and everything that was happening was a dream, like I was there in my head, but I couldn't control my body. It has been 5 days since I left, and I still don't feel like myself. What happened to me in that hotel? I live in Lompoc, California. I also live across the street from the cemetery. I used to hop the fence on one side of the cemetery to go to a friend's house who lived on the opposite side of it. If I went around, it would easily be a 4 to 5 block walk to her house. The keeper of the grounds who lived there called the cops on me several times, so I stopped. I also have been driving for years now, so there's no need anymore. Anyways, on one of my walks, I noticed a tree house in the cemetery off to the side. It was in a trench in a deep wooded area. There's been a few nights when I've gone and hung out inside of this tree house with a few friends. However, every time I went, I would see spirits. I was scared many times, but seeing my friends happy and enjoying themselves was what made everything worth it. Except for one night in December of 2018 when I had brought new friends with me. During this time I was going through a lot and kind of hanging out with a bad group of people, some of whom were with me that night. Like I've mentioned, I always at least see something, but usually only for a few seconds. This time, though, I saw a rather large man, kind of burly yet completely transparent. I felt him before I actually saw him, how sad and lost he was. But I could also feel how gentle that his soul was, and that he was only looking for help or just someone to understand. Since I could feel him, I started hearing footsteps breaking twigs, leaves, and such. After the initial feeling, I started hearing footsteps breaking twigs, leaves, and such. My friends heard it too. I looked over, and I saw this man, and all I could feel was how confused that he was. He started to walk up, but froze once I saw him. I yelled out to him that it was okay and that we weren't going to hurt him. I told him that it was safe for him to be there if he wanted to stick around, but then my friends wanted to leave with how freaked out that they were. I walked out first to be his guide, and he walked in front of me until he disappeared seconds later. I don't think I really helped him, considering that I didn't have much chance being with that group of friends and all, but I could feel just how gentle that he was, like I said. Sometimes I feel that gentle presence whenever I visit the graveyard, and I think of him. Today I went, because today is also the anniversary of me losing a friend. I felt that gentle presence when I visited her grave today. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. Loved the job, would have stayed longer, but administration sucked. Anyhow, that's another story. I worked night shift, and have had some really creepy things happen that just could not be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in the infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month. Not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud noise. To get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by a central control. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway, and then just slammed shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window so that the nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. When the door slammed, I thought it was just one of the officers messing around, and I jumped up and went to the window, but no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep, and I said, "Ha ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank, because frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off with absolutely no sense of humor. After that, I just thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down and everything just changed. It felt colder, and I sensed that I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I took my stethoscope from around my neck and put it on the desk and left my office to go into the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few, talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side, underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on the shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere, and I cannot find it. In my office, there is a large closet that holds all supplies that is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyhow, later in the shift, I needed to go into the closet and get something. I really don't remember what. And sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicks again, opens halfway, and slams shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after. So I go back in, and I swear the whole atmosphere was lighter. It was warmer, and I felt way more comfortable. When my shift was over, the Central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that that was the last time it happened, or that I got more comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened, it seems that the doors slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, almost as if I were being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts in the jail. My pen case in the women's wing, my med sheets in solitary central control room, my portable blood pressure cuff in the kitchen. And each and every time something of mine would show up in another part of the jail, the officers and I would look at the tapes and see no one. Remember, I said I felt like I was being stalked. Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse who worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had anything happen either. No doors slam, click open, shut, no stuff moving. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this kind of incident never, ever had occurred before. It got to the point for me that I started just not staying in my office. I would just get all the stuff that I needed for my shift and sit at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen ever again.